The Game Awards are only a week away, and there is some stiff competition this year for Game of the Year. Alan Wake 2 and Baldur's Gate 3 are obvious standouts, not to mention solid entries from Nintendo and Insomniac this year. But then there's Resident Evil 4, whose original game came out a full 18 years ago in 2005. That got me thinking if remakes or remasters should be nominated for something like Game of the Year, and if so, how that should be handled. I don't know if there's a clear answer to something like this, but let's talk about it anyway. First things first, when we're talking about remasters and remakes, what do we mean and how are they different? With people constantly throwing out the word remake, remaster, reboot, and even demake, it can sound confusing and some people might disagree on minor details, but the way I understand it, it's actually pretty simple. When we talk about remasters, we're basically looking at the same game that has been polished for modern audiences and modern consoles. Things like textures and modern quality of life stuff has been updated, but at the end of the day it is the same game with a new coat of paint and minimal changes. A remake, on the other hand, is a lot more involved and may end up a completely different experience entirely. More than a new coat of paint, it's the game being remade for audiences from the ground up. Games like this might even expand on the original in ways that they couldn't originally, like adding new missions that had to be cut or fleshing out the characters like the Dead Space remake did recently as well. So obviously there was a lot of gray area between the two, but to sum it up, remaster is a new coat of paint, updated visuals, remake is a lot more involved and a lot more of a ground up approach. That may seem simple if you already understand that, but I figured I would explain it real quick. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the Game Awards. When it comes to the Game Awards, right now remakes are not excluded in any way and are just included in whatever category that makes the most sense, regardless of the fact that they are remakes. The remake is then voted on by a jury as well as in part by the public, just like any other game. This can most notably include Game of the Year, but can also include categories such as Best Audio Design, which the Resident Evil 4 and Dead Space remakes are both nominated for. I find myself understanding this a bit more because it's focused on one aspect of the game, and so regardless of if it's a remake or not, that one aspect had to really stand out compared to everything else. But even then I go back and forth on that. The reason why Game of the Year has me so conflicted mostly has to do with the fact that including remakes could push out games that came out this year with no source material to build off from however many years ago. It can almost feel unfair in that way, especially when you consider that if a game is being remade, it is usually something that was beloved at the time already, enough for a company to invest a ton of resources and money into making it again. And that doesn't mean that those games don't deserve to be recognized, or that they'll even win anything this time around, but it is for sure something to consider when a game with a decades-long fan base is up against something that came out this year with no prior fan base. On the other hand, I think one argument why remakes should be considered for the Game Awards and Game of the Year in particular is the fact that more often than not, a whole new team worked on the game, and they deserve to be recognized for their work just like any other studio. Sure, they may have had the base story to work off of, which is huge, but that is about it when you really think about it. They are then making everything else from remodeling beloved characters to adding new missions entirely that fit in seamlessly to that original story, which, like making any other game, is a huge task. They also are working with the added pressure of trying to make a game that will live up to the original and satisfy fans that most likely know that original game like the back of their hand. It would be tough to completely exclude and ignore all that effort just because the game has existed in some form before, so I think there has to be a better way. So how do other award ceremonies handle something like this? I'm sure someone has had some sort of solution, or maybe I'm overthinking things and this isn't really a problem at all. When it comes to other award shows, it seems for the most part that remakes are not relegated to any different category and are instead included just like any other nominee, so maybe this is a non-problem after all. However, I'm too far into this video to stop now. There aren't many other long-running Game Awards shows I could turn to, but I did look at the history of the Golden Joysticks, which is the longest-running video games award show, so I figured it would be a good comparison to make. They make no distinction when it comes to remakes, and because of that, they've won in many different categories over the years. I would like to point out that the voting process is a little different, with the joysticks being entirely fan-voted, and the Game Awards being a combination of fan-voted and jury-voted, but I honestly have no idea if that really makes a difference in the grand scheme of things. As for other award shows, I also looked at the Oscars since they're the biggest award show that I could think of. It just so happens that they don't have to do with video games, but they are full of remakes. Now obviously movies are quite a bit different from video games, especially with the fact that movie remakes will often change actors, settings, and even the tone of the original work, which can make the thing look completely different than what it was based on or being remade from, while video games usually seek to enhance that experience instead of changing it. Not a one-to-one comparison, but something to think about as well, in my opinion. So what about the solution of putting remakes in a whole another category altogether? That seems like it could be a good solution in my opinion, And when looking this up, Jeff Keighley himself had given the idea some thought after I found an interview in a recent Q&A on Twitch. In response to the question, he had said, "The other thing people always ask is why don't we have a best remake or remaster category? We've talked about it. I think the question is, are there 5 amazing remakes every year? Some years there are. There were some amazing ones this year. Obviously, Resident Evil 4 is nominated for Game of the Year. Dead Space, a bunch of other good ones that came out this year. And the question also then is, would those remakes not be eligible for Game of the Year? Now for me, obviously this is a tough problem to tackle, especially with the amount of remakes being a toss-up from year to year. However, I think it's an important and fun thing to think about. The easiest choice is of course to just keep including them as we have up to this point, but just because it's easy doesn't mean it's the best option. Like I've mentioned before, remakes are usually remakes of beloved games, so if they're made right, they have an automatic boost to their popularity. One possible solution would just be to make the proposed best remake category in every other year sort of thing, so that there are more options for nominees and it isn't just whatever came out that one year. Obviously not a perfect solution. As for if they should still be included in other categories if the Game Awards were to separate them like this, honestly I'm as stumped as Jeff. It's a tough topic to crack or to even decide for sure if it needs fixing, but I'm sure either way someone won't be satisfied, so that's great. In the end, as for where I stand on this topic, I'm a little torn. It was tough to think about. On the one hand, I can see why it might be nice to put remakes in a different category so they can still be recognized while not taking the spotlight away from new games at the award ceremony. But on the other hand, is that even necessary? Just because a remake is based on an existing idea doesn't mean the creators didn't put in any less work into it or impart any less of their own creativity into the finished products. In some ways, it would be kind of similar to separating games that are based on books or adaptations of other existing properties. I don't know. Like I said, I'm torn. I would love to hear what you all have to say about this. Maybe I'm making an issue out of nothing. But it seems, at least from the small poll I did, that people are split on this topic a little bit. So if you think remakes should be included, a separate category, or not included at all, please let me know down in the comments and subscribe for more stuff like this. See you guys in the next video very soon.